Hi class, today we are getting back to the music history part of our class and we are going to talk about the next time period. So, anyone remember what that is called? Yes, it is the Baroque period. So the dates of the Baroque period are 1600 to 1750. And again, those are guesstimate dates. Music historians can go in, find some new discovery, a new journal, new treatise on music, and all of a sudden the dates have changed. So just putting that out there as a disclaimer. So we're going to take a look at some images to help us get into this style period. And we're going to compare images of David, biblical David, from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and then compare them with a Baroque artist. Okay, let's remind ourselves first of the Middle Ages version. We might look at this and call it sort of two-dimensional or flat. The emotions are not really shown, and this kind of lines up with the bare feeling of Gregorian chant and early polyphony, which was called organum, don't forget that. And it also lines up with the idea that composers in the Middle Ages did not really work to portray emotion. Then we look at the Renaissance version. Much more realism. And this lines up with the idea of composers working to portray the emotion in their music. Now if we go to Michelangelo's David with the Baroque artist Bernini, how are they different? Renaissance David is at rest. There is that sense of stillness. Baroque David is full of motion. It's very dynamic. He is in the process of slinging that stone. Let's take a look at another image of a Baroque church. Kind of add on to what we're gleaning about the Baroque period. Because art history, music history, the history of literature, the history of the world, they're all intertwined. All right. When we look at the Baroque church, every surface is filled with something. There's ornamentation. It's very busy. It's fancy. It's almost too busy and too fancy. And it's really hard to focus in on one element. But there is a unity in it. The ornamentation brings it all together. So these images help us to see, again, as I said, how the world of art and architecture parallel the world of music. They all feed into each other throughout history. Moving on. We're going to explore some of the elements of Baroque music by listening to several pieces. This is going to supplement your reading material, so be sure to read it, obviously. You have to read it, and there's a quiz. There are actually three different phases in the Baroque period: the early, middle, and late. And when we discuss the music of the Baroque period, we generally are talking about the late Baroque. That's what we're going to be referring to. When I say the sounds of Baroque period, I'm talking about the sounds of the late Baroque period. That's what most people understand to be Baroque. Because when you go from one time period into another, it's not like there's a sharp divide. This is one of the reasons that historians might argue about dates, because it's a gradual shift and a development, and then all of a sudden you feel, all of a sudden, it's different. Well, no, it took us 100 years to get here. That kind of thing. We're going to listen to an iconic example, and we're going to see what we can discover about the music of the Baroque. So this is the first movement of the first section of the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. This is called Allegro, La Primavera, or Spring. In fact, the entire section is called Spring, and each movement has a different flavor of spring. And actually, each movement goes with a sonnet. So we're going to go through it and see if you can match the music up with the sonnet. Did you hear the elements of the sonnet? I feel like there were clear pieces of that sonnet. There's the essence of springtime. You could hear the birds, the murmuring streams, breezes, the thunderstorm, and then the thunderstorm dying away, and then the birds coming out and singing once again. In terms of the musical form, we keep coming back to this same little musical motive after each piece of the sonnet. This is called ritornello form. Just think return. It's the return form. So we're going to listen one more time, and I want to see if you can hear the form, and then also see if you can pay attention to some of the other elements of music. All right, we've listened to it one more time. Let's talk about dynamics. There are no big crescendos or decrescendos, which is a gradual getting softer or getting louder. Crescendo, yeah, getting good grief. Like, I'm just like, camera is backwards, and so I'm going crescendo. Okay, there we go. From left to right. I believe that's how you're seeing it. So there are none of those. There are no big crescendos or decrescendos. When the sound changes, when the dynamics change, it is sudden. And we call that terraced dynamics. And this is due to the use of the harpsichord, which, if you will remember from our keyboard section, only plays at one volume. Instruments. What do we hear? Solo violin, a big group of strings, and harpsichord. This is a solo concerto, and it's completely instrumental, and it calls for specific instruments. Remember, Renaissance instrumental music, play something loud instrument, play with a soft instrument. This is play with this list of instruments, strings, harpsichord, etc. Overall, in the Baroque period, instrumental music finally catches up with vocal music in importance. It's important enough to say, I want this list of instruments. Let's talk about rhythm now. We've got a consistent rhythmic pulse, and we've got rhythmic patterns that are used and repeated. So there's a unity of rhythm as we keep returning to the same motive. Then melody. We have recurring pieces of the melody throughout. And it's also really showy in the violin. So we have a lot of virtuosity. And if you think back to that Baroque church, how fancy it was, this makes sense. Very fancy, very showy, showing off. Okay, now let's go to the second movement of this section of the Four Seasons. So we're still in spring. And this is called Largo. And let's take a look at the poem while we listen, or sonnet, and see if you can identify the dog barking in the music. right? Any guesses? The instrument that is the dog barking is the viola. And if you think on the things that we've just talked about, in this piece, you can hear a lot of the methods that we used in the first movement, or that we heard in the first movement. Terraced dynamics, repetition of melodic idea, consistent rhythmic pulse. And this time it's the accompanying strings as the solo violin plays and the viola barks. Now we're going to listen to the final movement of the first section, and it's called Allegro. Again, you're like, really? Can you name it something else? No, it's also Allegro. Same name, so of course we have the number in there to identify it. And there is a reference to bagpipes. What instrument do we think is playing the bagpipe sound? Okay, so the instruments that are the bagpipes are the cello and the bass, and they have this sort of droning sound that a bagpipe would have. And again, we hear much of the same things that we heard in the other two movements. Let's talk about the overall emotion or mood in these three pieces. The mood in the three movements that we listen to, each movement has a distinct emotion or mood throughout. Unity of mood. So while the mood is distinct for each different movement, each movement itself is unified in the mood. So we had an allegro opening, and then we had a largo, and then we had an allegro closing, but we feel that unity of mood using the repetition of rhythm and melodic motives, right? It's like a little snippet of theme. A melodic motive is like a little piece of melody. A rhythmic motive is literally just a little piece of rhythm. That's all. Unity is a big thing in the Baroque period. So again, we picture that busy ceiling of the Baroque church, and we're thinking, unity? Well, yeah, there is a theme in that Baroque church. So even though we have abrupt changes in dynamics, terraced dynamics, overall the mood is going to remain the same throughout a movement. So in David, we have one overarching emotion, like there's nothing else going on in the statue or the Baroque version of David. And in the church, it's all very busy, but there's a unity in the ornamentation. It's the same in the music, an overarching emotion and a unity in the ornamentation. Okay, we are going to stop there, and then we will pick up for the Baroque period, part 2. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.